I wasn't planning on going out for Black Friday this year, but my friend Lisa convinced me. She had been eyeing a discounted laptop, and I figured I could pick up a few gifts for my family. So we bundled up and headed to the mall just before dawn, bracing ourselves for the madness. The mall was packed, and as soon as we stepped inside, it was clear this was going to be an ordeal. People were pushing and shoving, weaving around each other with carts loaded with bags and boxes. We squeezed our way through the crowd toward the electronics store where Lisa's laptop was on sale. As we neared the store, a commotion broke out. A group of people had gathered around a pop-up booth in the center of the mall, and I could see a large, burly man handing out cards to anyone who stopped. Curious, Lisa and I approached, watching as he smiled and spoke in a booming voice. He announced that he was offering special mystery discount cards for Black Friday. Each card held a different discount, but one lucky card offered a full refund on anything purchased that day. His spiel was convincing, and people around us were buzzing with excitement, eager to try their luck. I shrugged, figuring it couldn't hurt, and grabbed a card from him. The man gave me a strange smile, holding onto the card for just a second too long before releasing it. His eyes held mine as he wished me luck in a tone that felt more sinister than friendly. I glanced at Lisa, who had also taken a card, and we moved back into the crowd. We checked the cards right away. Mine showed a 20% discount on any one item, which was nice but not exactly a jackpot. Lisa's, however, had a strange message, one special experience. It read, "Redeemable today only." She frowned, looking as confused as I felt, and we decided it was probably just some gimmick. Shrugging, we went back to our shopping. After a long wait, we finally made it into the electronics store, where Lisa managed to snag the laptop she wanted. I browsed the aisles, picking up a few things for my family, feeling slightly unnerved by the crowd. Everywhere I turned, people were pushing, shoving, and grabbing, as if in a frenzy to buy as much as possible. As we made our way toward the checkout line, I noticed the burly man from the booth again, standing just outside the store, watching us with an unsettling intensity. His face was blank, his eyes tracking us as we moved closer to the register. I nudged Lisa, who turned to look and immediately tensed up. We tried to ignore him, focusing on paying for our purchases and getting out of there as quickly as possible. Once we'd checked out, we hurried toward the mall exit, hoping to avoid another encounter with the man. But just as we reached the doors, he called Lisa again and said that she hadn't redeemed her experience yet. He was holding up Lisa's card, waving it in the air. Lisa shot me a nervous look, but curiosity got the best of her. She walked over hesitantly as he handed her the card with that same unsettling smile. He told her that her experience was waiting for her just outside the mall, in the parking lot. He pointed to a distant corner of the lot, far from the main entrance, where a lone car was parked under a dim streetlight. Lisa thanked him quickly, and we made our way outside, trying to brush off the encounter. But as we walked toward the car, I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. The parking lot was mostly empty now, most people having already left with their Black Friday hauls. The car was an old, beat-up sedan, with its headlights off and no sign of anyone inside. Lisa hesitated, clearly spooked, and I suggested we just go back to the car and leave. But she shook her head, determined to see this through. She was convinced it was just some sort of promotion, maybe a free gift or a holiday surprise. I stayed close to her, hoping she was right. As we reached the car, the back door creaked open, and a woman stepped out. She looked ordinary enough, but something about her expression sent a chill down my spine. She was smiling, but her eyes were flat, unblinking, and she seemed to be staring straight through us. She congratulated Lisa and said she was the lucky winner. She told Lisa to come with her for her experience. Lisa looked back at me, suddenly uncertain, but before I could say anything, the woman grabbed her arm with a grip that looked far too strong. Lisa tried to pull away, but the woman tightened her hold, her smile never wavering. I grabbed Lisa's other arm, trying to pull her back, but the woman was unnaturally strong, barely budging. The woman's smile grew wider, and she whispered that it was time for Lisa's experience. She said Lisa had wanted a special Black Friday deal. Panic surged through me, and I shouted for help, my voice echoing across the empty parking lot. Lisa struggled, twisting and pulling as the woman's grip seemed to tighten even more. I managed to yank her free, just as the woman's smile faded, replaced by a cold, furious glare. Lisa and I stumbled back, breathing heavily, and ran toward our car without looking back. We jumped in, locked the doors, and peeled out of the lot as fast as we could, my hands shaking on the wheel. As we sped away, Lisa looked back through the rear window, her face pale. She said the woman was still standing there, watching us, her expression blank and unreadable. We didn't stop driving until we were miles away from the mall. Only then did we dare to talk about what had happened, each of us trying to make sense of the strange encounter. Lisa still had the card clutched in her hand, and when she looked down at it, the words had changed. Now it simply said, "Thank you for shopping." We never figured out who that woman was or what kind of experience they'd planned for Lisa. But every time Black Friday comes around, I remember that look in the woman's eyes and wonder how close we came to something truly dangerous. Since that day, we've avoided Black Friday shopping altogether. No discount is worth the chance of running into something or someone that wants more than just our money. Black Friday shopping is a tradition for me. Every year I brave the crowds, fueled by coffee and the thrill of snagging the best deals. But last year was different. I wasn't prepared for what happened, and thinking back on it still sends a chill down my spine. It started like any other Black Friday. I arrived at the mall around midnight, joining a line of people outside the entrance. Shoppers clutched their bags, eager and restless, their eyes fixed on the doors like predators about to pounce. The air was thick with anticipation and the scent of cinnamon from a nearby coffee cart. I shuffled my feet, mentally going over my list of must-haves for the night. As the doors swung open, a cheer erupted, and we surged forward in a chaotic wave. Inside, the fluorescent lights seemed harsher than usual, illuminating rows of marked-down merchandise and sales racks. I made a beeline for the electronics section, where I planned to grab a new TV. Everything was moving smoothly, a little frantic, but that was part of the excitement. It was what I loved about Black Friday. While I waited for an associate to bring my TV from the back, I noticed a man standing near the corner of the aisle. He wore a hoodie pulled low over his face, and his posture was tense, hands clenched at his sides. He wasn't looking at any of the merchandise, just standing there, watching people rush by with a blank, almost detached expression. I tried to ignore him, figuring he was just as overwhelmed as everyone else. Finally, the associate returned with my TV, and I hurried to the checkout line, cradling the box in my arms. The line was long, snaking through several aisles, but I didn't mind waiting. I was already imagining the TV in my living room, picturing movie nights and game days with friends. The man from the aisle appeared again, now a few people behind me in line. He didn't have anything in his hands, just stood there with that same blank expression. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. Black Friday brought out all kinds of people, after all. Still, something about his presence made me uncomfortable. After what felt like an eternity, I finally reached the register. As the cashier scanned my items, I glanced back, and my stomach dropped. The man had moved closer, only one person behind me now, his eyes fixed on me. I paid quickly, clutching my bags and making my way toward the exit, my pulse quickening. I told myself he was probably just looking for a quick way out, that he hadn't even noticed me. Outside, the night air was cold, and the parking lot was packed with cars. I weaved through the maze of vehicles, glancing over my shoulder more often than I usually would. The man wasn't behind me, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I took a deep breath, chalking it up to my imagination. As I neared my car, I pulled my keys from my pocket, fumbling with the lock in my haste. Just as I was about to open the door, a shadow fell over me. I froze, feeling a prickling sensation at the back of my neck. Slowly I turned around. There he was, the man in the hoodie, standing just a few feet away. His hands were empty, his face partially obscured by the hood, but his eyes were sharp and focused, locked onto me with an intensity that made my heart race. I asked him if he needed something, hoping my voice didn't sound as shaky as I felt. He didn't answer, just took a step closer, his gaze unblinking. I gripped my keys tightly, considering my options. The parking lot was packed, but most people were busy with their own purchases, their laughter and chatter echoing across the lot. He took another step, and I took one back, pressing myself against the car. My mind raced, trying to think of something, anything to say or do that would make him leave. Finally, I stammered out that I didn't have any cash on me, hoping he'd take it as a hint to go away. He tilted his head, a strange, almost curious expression crossing his face. Then, in a low voice, he muttered something I couldn't quite make out, his words lost in the noise of the crowd. I asked him to repeat himself, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know what he'd said. He leaned in, his face closer now, and whispered that I had something he needed. The words made my skin crawl. I tried to keep calm, glancing around for help, but everyone was too absorbed in their own post-shopping haze to notice us. I asked what he wanted, hoping he'd just take my shopping bags and leave. He looked at the TV in my arms, then back at me, and shook his head. He said he didn't care about the TV. It was something else, something he'd been watching me for. My heart hammered in my chest as I realized I had no idea what he was talking about. I told him to leave me alone, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He just stared at me for a long moment, his gaze unwavering, before finally stepping back. As he backed away, he murmured something I'll never forget. He told me he'd see me again, that he'd been watching for a while now, and that tonight was just the beginning. With that, he turned and melted into the crowd, leaving me standing there, breathless and shaken. I fumbled with my keys, my hands trembling as I unlocked the car and slid into the driver's seat. I locked the doors and sat there for a few moments, trying to process what had just happened. My mind was a whirl of confusion and fear, the excitement of Black Friday completely overshadowed by the encounter. I drove home in a daze, constantly checking my mirrors, half expecting to see him following me. By the time I got home, I was exhausted, every nerve on edge. I double-checked the locks on my doors, even placed a chair under the doorknob in my bedroom, something I hadn't done since I was a kid. For days afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I'd catch glimpses of someone out of the corner of my eye, a shadow lurking just beyond my line of sight. Every time I turned around, there was no one there, but the feeling persisted, gnawing at the back of my mind. Even now, months later, I still feel that sense of unease. Black Friday is coming up again, and friends have asked if I'm planning to go. I just laugh it off, telling them I've had enough shopping excitement to last a lifetime. But in truth, I know I'll never feel safe in a crowded store again. Because somewhere out there, in the sea of faces, I'm convinced he's still watching, waiting for the right moment to show up again. And this time, I'm not sure I'll be lucky enough to walk away. I had never been one to brave the early morning madness of Black Friday shopping, but my younger sister, Emma, insisted. She had her eye on a specific item, some high-tech gaming console that was marked down to a fraction of its usual price. I agreed to go along with her, figuring it might be fun to people watch and maybe even pick up a deal or two for myself. We arrived at the store just before it opened, joining the thick crowd waiting outside. People were packed together, jostling and murmuring, each one eager to be the first through the doors. The energy was intense, a mixture of excitement and barely contained aggression. I held tight to Emma's hand, already regretting agreeing to this. When the doors finally opened, the crowd surged forward, nearly knocking us off our feet. We stumbled inside, barely managing to stay together as people pushed past us, each one on a mission. The noise was deafening, a mix of shouting, laughter, and the hum of the store's overhead lights. Emma led the way, weaving through the aisles with determination. I stayed close behind, keeping an eye on the chaotic scene around us. People were grabbing items off shelves, sometimes 2 or 3 of the same thing, like it was the last they'd ever see. One woman shoved me aside to reach a stack of blenders, and I stumbled into a display of Christmas decorations. Emma finally spotted the aisle with the gaming consoles and sprinted ahead, leaving me trailing behind. I called after her, trying to keep up, but she was too quick. By the time I reached the aisle, she had already grabbed her prize, clutching the box tightly as she beamed with excitement. I was about to congratulate her when I noticed someone standing at the other end of the aisle, watching us. He was tall and thin, dressed in a heavy black coat that seemed out of place in the overheated store. His face was partially hidden by the hood, but I could see his eyes, a piercing, unsettling gaze that seemed fixed on Emma. I nudged her and nodded in his direction, asking if she knew him. She shook her head, her smile fading as she noticed his stare. He didn't move, didn't even blink, just kept watching us with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I told Emma we should leave, that we'd gotten what we came for and there was no point in hanging around any longer. She nodded, clutching the console close to her chest, and we made our way toward the checkout line. I glanced back once, and he was still there, watching us, his expression unreadable. The checkout line was long, but I didn't mind. I felt safer surrounded by other people, and I hoped that whatever weirdness we'd experienced back in the aisle was just a fluke. Maybe he was just another shopper, disappointed that Emma had grabbed the last console before he could get one. As we moved forward in line, I kept looking around, scanning the store for any sign of him. At one point, I saw him a few aisles over, standing still among the bustling shoppers, his eyes locked on us. I could feel my heart pounding as I tried to keep calm, reminding myself that we were in a public place and he couldn't possibly harm us here. But as we neared the front of the line, I realized he was moving toward us. I whispered to Emma, telling her to be ready to run if he came any closer. She looked at me with wide eyes, clearly just as unnerved as I was. When we finally reached the cashier, I handed over some cash, telling Emma to go straight to the car while I finished up. She nodded, hurrying out of the store with her prize clutched tightly. I watched her go, relieved to see her reach the exit without incident. As I waited for the cashier to finish ringing up my purchases, I felt a presence behind me. I didn't dare turn around, but I could sense him there, just a few feet away. The cashier handed me my change, and I mumbled a quick thank you before hurrying toward the exit. Once outside, I scanned the parking lot, spotting Emma waiting by the car. I made my way over to her, my heart racing, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. But as I reached the car, I saw him again, standing near a row of carts, still staring. Emma asked if everything was okay, and I forced a smile, telling her it was fine. I unlocked the car, and we climbed inside, locking the doors behind us. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him standing there, his gaze following us as we drove away. The drive home was tense. Emma asked if I'd noticed the man following us, and I admitted that I had. She was silent for a moment before saying that, just before she'd left the store, he had whispered something to her as she passed him. He had said, "Enjoy it while it lasts." The words sent a chill down my spine. I told her it was probably nothing, just some bitter shopper who missed out on a good deal. But the look in her eyes told me she didn't believe it, and neither did I. That night I lay awake, thinking about the man in the store, his eyes, his words. I told myself it was over, that he was just another Black Friday shopper who'd gotten too wrapped up in the madness. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't a coincidence. A few days later, Emma called me, her voice shaky. She told me that her new console had stopped working, that the screen had gone black and wouldn't turn on no matter what she tried. She'd reached out to the store, but they claimed no responsibility, saying all sales were final. When I visited her that weekend, we tried plugging it in one last time, hoping it was just a glitch. But as the screen flickered to life, we saw something strange. The screen displayed a single phrase, white letters on a black background. It said, "I told you to enjoy it." The screen went black again, and no matter what we tried, it never turned on after that. Emma ended up returning the console, but I knew she'd never forget that message, and neither would I. I've never been one to enjoy the chaos of Black Friday. The crowds, the pushing, the mad dash to get the best deals. It all seemed overwhelming and unnecessary. But this year, after hearing about a ridiculous sale on a new gaming console I'd been eyeing, I decided to give it a shot. A friend of mine, Alex, convinced me to join him. He was a seasoned Black Friday veteran, always boasting about the treasures he scored every year, and he insisted that this year would be the best yet. We arrived at the store around 4 a.m., well before the doors opened. The parking lot was already nearly full, the lights from the building casting a faint glow on the sea of cars. I could hear the hum of excited voices and the rustling of people waiting by the doors. I was nervous, but Alex reassured me that we'd be in and out in no time. He had it all planned out. As the clock ticked down, the crowd grew louder, and I started to feel the anxiety set in. People pressed closer to the entrance, jostling each other in anticipation. I stood next to Alex, who seemed completely unfazed by the scene around him. He was practically bouncing on his heels, ready to pounce on the console when the doors finally opened. When the time came, the doors swung wide, and a flood of bodies surged forward. I stumbled a little trying to keep up with Alex, who was already darting ahead. The store was chaotic, aisles crammed with people, and everything felt like a blur of flashing lights and shouting. I kept my head down and focused on the path in front of me, trying to avoid being knocked over by the frantic shoppers pushing past me. Alex was like a man on a mission, weaving through the aisles with ease. I did my best to follow him, but the crowd was thick. At one point, I found myself stuck between two people who seemed to have no concept of personal space. They pushed and shoved their way down the aisle, their voices angry as they argued over the last stack of discounted DVDs. I was starting to feel the weight of the situation. The stress, the noise, the tension in the air. And it was beginning to overwhelm me. Finally, we made our way toward the electronics section. The line for the gaming console was already several feet long, and I could see people trying to shove each other out of the way to get closer to the front. I felt a pit in my stomach. Was this really worth it? Alex, however, was undeterred. He pointed to a display a few feet away, and I followed him, relieved to be out of the thickest part of the crowd. But as we approached, I noticed something strange. One of the store employees stood near the display, his hands raised in the air, as if trying to calm the crowd. He looked flustered, and his eyes were darting nervously around. The usual excitement in the air seemed to have shifted into something darker, something unsettling. Then I saw him. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, was standing at the front of the line. His eyes were locked on the consoles, but his posture was rigid and defensive. I couldn't help but notice the way he was gripping the cart, his knuckles white from the force. He turned slightly, catching my eye for a moment. His face was expressionless, but there was something in the way he looked at me that made my skin crawl. He wasn't just focused on getting a deal. No, there was something more to it. Before I could process what was happening, the man let out a low growl, a sound that seemed out of place in the chaos of the store. He jerked his cart forward and collided with another shopper who was trying to reach the same display. The impact was enough to knock the shopper off balance, sending them crashing into a nearby rack of electronics. The man didn't seem to care. He shoved the other shopper aside and grabbed the console off the shelf, holding it with both hands like it was the most important thing in the world. The crowd around him fell silent for a split second. No one seemed sure what to do. I looked around, expecting to see security rushing in, but there was nothing. People began murmuring, some of them looking nervously at each other, but no one stepped forward to confront the man. And then, without warning, he turned and pushed his way through the crowd, knocking over anything in his path. The aisle seemed to part in front of him, and I realized with a sudden sense of dread that no one was going to stop him. The air felt thick with tension, and the usual excitement of Black Friday shopping seemed to have evaporated. I turned to Alex, my voice shaky as I asked if we should do something. He looked at me, a nervous smile on his face, but his eyes betrayed his own discomfort. He said we should just wait and see. But that didn't feel right. Something was off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was witnessing more than just a crazy shopper. This was something darker. A few moments later, I heard the unmistakable sound of shouting. The man was at the checkout, arguing with a store employee. He was demanding to buy as many consoles as he could, and the employee, clearly out of his depth, was trying to explain that there were limits to how many each customer could purchase. The man wasn't having it. He slammed his fist on the counter, and the whole store seemed to pause in response. Alex and I exchanged a look. It was clear this wasn't just a regular Black Friday incident. Something had shifted in the atmosphere. People were starting to back away, giving the man more space, but the tension in the air was palpable. The employee seemed to be getting more nervous, and I could see other customers edging closer, eager to witness the confrontation. I wanted to leave to get as far away from the situation as possible, but my legs felt rooted to the floor. I didn't know what would happen next. Just then, I saw security rushing down the aisle, heading straight for the man. The situation seemed to explode all at once. The man turned to face the approaching guards, his expression darkening. He raised his arms as if preparing for a fight, and for a moment I thought he was going to charge at them. But then, he seemed to think better of it. With a muttered curse, he turned and stormed out of the store, his hands still gripping the console tightly. The store was left in stunned silence, and I could see people exchanging uneasy glances. The whole scene felt surreal, like something you would expect to see in a movie, not in a place as ordinary as a department store on Black Friday. Alex and I quickly left the store, not wanting to stick around to see if the situation escalated further. The car ride home was silent, both of us lost in our thoughts. I felt unsettled, shaken by the intensity of what had just happened. That Black Friday, I realized something important. Some people will go to extreme lengths for things they want, and sometimes the madness of the crowds can bring out the worst in people. The excitement of the hunt for a deal had morphed into something far more sinister that day. I never went back to that store for Black Friday shopping again. Some things, I decided, just weren't worth the risk. There was something